about the Nine-Dash Line and China's sinister conspiracy. Dear viewers, welcome back to the latest episode of Tuyin Math. Dear audience, the South China Sea dispute continues to be a destabilizing risk in the region. The South China Sea dispute has become one of the most complex disputes in the world. The complexity of the South China Sea dispute stems from the complicated sovereignty claims of multiple countries over overlapping areas. And moreover, it is not merely a dispute about international law, maritime boundaries, or territorial waters. But beyond that, it intertwines with geopolitical interests, control over strategic sea routes, and exploitation of marine resources, particularly oil. China has always harbored ambitions to monopolize the South China Sea and in recent years has openly demonstrated this ambition by announcing the illegal Nine-Dash Line claim covering nearly 90% of the South China Sea area, as well as accelerating illegal reclamation of reefs into artificial islands as bases to realize this goal. Along with the aforementioned wrongful actions, Chinese officials have also made very meticulous preparations to disseminate misleading messages about the country's sovereignty claims worldwide. With the aim of gradually changing the international community's perspective, the issue for China in the current context is to know how to make the claims hidden behind the Nine-Dash Line compatible with the country's participation in the Law of the Sea Convention with boundaries of exclusive economic zones and discussions taking place in Vietnam and China show that the Chinese government has never officially referred to the Nine-Dash Line as an inviolable boundary of China's sovereignty in the South China Sea. This is one of the first fundamental elements that needs to be emphasized. Indeed, maintaining a representation of the Nine-Dash Line on maps published by Beijing creates ambiguity about the substance of China's claims. A prolonged situation stemming from the fact that most Chinese people believe this is simply an affirmation of a fait accompli and therefore nothing to debate. The Nine-Dash Line first appeared around 1947 in a private map collection rather than a state-published one. In the form of a hand-drawn continuous line, more specific research is needed to determine the exact origin of this line. In reality, it appears there are no coordinates for any points that could define that Nine-Dash Line. After its appearance, the hand-drawn continuous line changed into the 11-Dash Line, then became the Nine-Dash Line since 1950, that is, after the establishment of the People's Republic of China. These three stages form an important element to note for subsequent disputes. Maps of the South China Sea and the Nine-Dash Line published at different times that we can find all emerged after 1950. Indeed, on those maps, inscriptions are either in simplified Chinese characters, not the traditional characters that Chinese nationalists still use, or an unfamiliar writing using the pinyin system, the writing form accepted by the People's Republic of China government, different from the phonetic system previously used by the Republic of China. Under such conditions, it can be understood that the Nine-Dash Line is not an official expression of China's sovereign will, followed by that of other countries regarding emerged lands and sometimes submerged features, as in the case of Macclesfield Bank. If this is indeed the limit China has drawn for its playground, careful analysis reveals many details. First, there are the straight baselines that China established around the Paracel Islands. It must be said that China excessively misapplies Part 4 of the Law of the Sea Convention by attributing archipelagic state status to the Paracels. In reality, the Paracels cannot have this status because they do not meet the criteria specified in Article 46 of the Law of the Sea Convention, according to which, to have archipelagic state status, the territory must be independent, consisting only of islands and having no connection to the mainland. Even if the Paracels meet the last two criteria, they do not meet the first criterion, the criterion of independence, because they are subject to sovereignty disputes between Vietnam and China. Regarding overall navigation, the regime of islands should be applied to the Paracels, depending on whether humans can inhabit them or not, as stipulated in Part 8 of the Law of the Sea Convention. Additionally, we see that the straight baselines applied to the Paracels do not coincide with the Nine-Dash Line and vice versa. If China does not want to contradict itself, they should not have established straight baselines around the Paracels. When questions about this contradiction are raised, only ambiguous answers are given instead of convincing explanations.
The second detail is that China defined its territorial sea in the law promulgated on February 25, 1992.
In this law, the South China Sea is not mentioned as territorial waters. Only the archipelagos, or other constituent parts of the South,
are clearly stated as national territory of China. Thus, China's exclusive economic zones should also be determined based on this law.
The third detail arises from the odd statements made by the representative of one of China's research institutes. Accordingly, the 9-dash line is not created by the communist regime, but is a legacy of the previous nationalist regime. We can understand that the existence of the 9-dash line as it is now is not the fault of the Beijing government.
More seriously, even if expressed in a confusing manner, this official shows that what China primarily demands is that the disputing parties acknowledge that there is an overall dispute and, more importantly, that they acknowledge the existence of disputed areas and that disputes actually exist over the mentioned regions. This means that China wants Vietnam to acknowledge that there is no dispute over the Paracel Islands, which Hanoi refuses to do. What China aims to achieve here is for both countries to accept the status quo imposed militarily between the two nations from 1947 to 1974. And that the Paracel Islands issue is henceforth permanently resolved in China's favor. China does not intend to conduct any negotiations on this issue. They have clearly stated so. If Vietnam has genuine documents with legal value proving that the enemy's emperors actually exercised their sovereignty over these islands in the pre-colonial period, and this sovereignty was subsequently exercised by the French colonialists, this argument for sovereignty over these islands would be much weaker than Vietnam. Even if China claims they exercised sovereignty over the South China Sea since the Song Dynasty, i.e., from 960 to 1279, at least, that is what Chinese children learn from their history books. The issue of providing more reliable evidence, rather than just loudly claiming that Chinese fishermen have long frequented these waters, is the crucial point now, and this should actually be the factor allowing the determination of actual sovereignty over the Paracel Islands. China avoids discussing the reality of the sovereignty issue over Macclesfield Bank. An area that is particularly problematic is assessed by one of China's maritime law experts. In fact, although it does not meet any standards of the law of the Sea Convention regarding territorial reality in such cases, because the convention only regulates above waterbanks or visible submerged rocks, as defined in the convention's provisions on low tide elevations. Though this definition is still unclear, asserting sovereignty over this area is difficult for any country. Yet, these low tide elevations, located in a crucial position far south of the Taiwan Strait, pose a real danger to navigation for ships avoiding them. This implies that any government must have the responsibility to warn and ensure maritime safety in the vicinity of this bank. However, this does not include sovereign rights around these banks. China might appear willing to discuss the Spratly Islands as part of a deceptive strategy to make the world think that China is capable of compromise, or because China lacks sufficient factors to firmly assert sovereignty over this archipelago. This interpretation becomes more plausible as the South China Sea Institute of China, located in Haikou, the capital of Hainan Province, which is highly reputable with the Chinese central government, has a department specializing in research on the Spratly Islands, while there are no dedicated research departments for other archipelagos. This indicates that the 9-dash line still cannot disappear from current Chinese maps. In early 2013, China's National Administration of Surveying, Mapping and Geoinformation published a map of the 9-dash line with 10 segments and claimed it was the first time China clearly depicted the islands in the South China Sea on this map, but did not explain why the 9-dash line changed from 9 to 10 segments. Regarding the legal, historical, and practical basis of China's so-called maritime boundary, the note verbal dated May 7, 2009, is the first document expressing China's official stance on the 9-dash line claim, now 10 segments, and also the first time China officially announced this claim to United Nations member states. With this announcement, China demands that the international community recognize the historical nature of the 9-dash line, treating the South China Sea as a historic bay of China. The 9-dash line is understood as China's maritime boundary, and as such, China would exclusively occupy 80% of the South China Sea, turning it into China's internal waters.
However, China's actions have been rejected by Vietnam and the international community.
Considering the 9-dash line depicted on the chart as invalid due to lacking legal, historical, and practical basis.
First, the 9-dash line cannot be considered China's maritime boundary. Because according to many international precedents, the most important characteristic of an international boundary is stability and definitiveness. Meanwhile, the 9-dash line lacks stability and determinacy. To date, the 9-dash line still lacks precise coordinates to be clearly defined in practice. On the other hand, China had to remove 2 segments itself, from 11 segments in 1948 to 9 segments in 1953.
Due to its irrational nature,
a line without a baseline and without clearly defined longitude and latitude according to international law cannot be considered a national border. Second, the South China Sea cannot be considered a historic bay of China, because according to the International Law Commission, a bay or body of water recognized as historic must meet at least 3 conditions.
1. The coastal state must exercise sovereignty over the waters they claim. 2.
The exercise of that power must be continuous over time.
3. The views of other countries on that claim.
Additionally, countries claiming based on historical grounds have the responsibility to provide evidence
for these disputed waters. Legally, historically, and practically, China has not presented any convincing evidence
proving they have exercised sovereignty genuinely, continuously, and peacefully over this vast sea area. Chinese authorities have also not established or maintained any exclusive management in this sea area.
Although this claim line has appeared multiple times on Chinese maps, the People's Republic of China
has never made any official statement about the 9-dash line. Even in important Chinese legal documents on the sea, such as the 1958 Declaration on the Territorial Sea, the 1992 Law on the Territorial Sea and Contiguous Zone, the 1996 Declaration on the and the 1998 Law on the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf, this claim line is not mentioned.
It can be affirmed that from the publication of the map with the 9-dash line in the South China Sea until before May 7, 2009,
both the Republic of China government and the People's Republic of China
had never officially claimed or explained the 9-dash line. Therefore, it is understandable that other countries, including Vietnam, did not voice opposition.
This silence cannot be considered passive recognition. On the other hand, in 1951, at the San Francisco Conference, participating countries rejected the Soviet Union's proposal
to return the Paracel and Spratly Islands to China. In fact, the sovereignty disputes over the Paracel and Spratly Islands and the claims of other countries in the region over parts of the Spratly Islands prove that China's claim has never been recognized by the international community. Therefore, historically, China cannot assert the claim of the 9-dash line they drew themselves since 1947 on the grounds that no one objected.
3. China occupied the Paracel Islands in 1974. For a long time, these islands have belonged to Vietnam's sovereignty and are not terra nullius. Moreover, in the diplomatic note of September 29, 1932, from the Republic of China's diplomatic mission in Paris, it affirmed that the crescent group of the Shisha Islands, i.e., the Paracels, constitute the southernmost part of Chinese territory.
Thus, the Spratly Islands have never appeared on China's sovereignty map.
History records that countries in the region have continued activities in the South China Sea, such as navigation, oil and gas exploitation, and fishing, normally without being hindered by China.
Therefore, China cannot say that they have exercised genuine, continuous,
and peaceful sovereignty over the South China Sea since 1947. The 9-dash line, also known as the Cow's Tongue line, presented by China in the diagram attached to the note dated
May 7, 2009, also cannot grant China sovereign rights and jurisdiction
over the waters inside this line under the regime of the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf. According to the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, because of the progressive nature of the 1982 UNCLOS and expanded the sovereign rights of coastal states in protecting natural resources associated with our territory. Meanwhile, the 9-dash line is thousands of kilometers away from the Chinese mainland.
Clearly, China's claim does not comply with the provisions of the 1982 UNCLOS.
According to international law, the claim line drawn by China, based on an individual's map, has no scientific basis.
No international legal value, and cannot be accepted. The content of China's note.
And the attached maps seriously violate Vietnam's sovereignty, sovereign rights, and legitimate jurisdiction in the South China Sea. China's public assertion of the Nine-Dash Line claim, illegal installation of the Hai Guang 981 oil rig, and deployment of numerous escort vessels, including military ships, deeply infringing upon Vietnam's exclusive economic zone and obstructing the operations of Vietnamese law enforcement forces, deliberately using force to threaten and endanger the life, health, and property of Vietnamese law enforcement and fishermen has seriously violated international law, directly affecting peace, civility, security, safety, and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea region. At the same time, making the situation in the South China Sea increasingly complex, contrary to the efforts of regional countries and the international community in seeking long-term, stable, and sustainable solutions to resolve disputes in the South China Sea.
It can be said that China's unreasonable arguments and blatant, inhumane unilateral actions
are all part of their deep-seated scheme and ambition to monopolize the South China Sea. In the face of China's schemes and actions, the entire party, army, and people of Vietnam
have no choice but to respond resolutely, peacefully, and in compliance with international law,
to firmly protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the sacred fatherland,
and not only the Vietnamese people and the international community, but after the information and images
of China using military ships and aircraft to escort the HE 981 drilling rig to install in Vietnam's waters,
were fully published in the mass media. Even the Chinese and Hong Kong people
have recognized and protested against the schemes of their own country.
1. Netizens are straightforward.
Currently, the borderline, which is the Nine-Dash Line, has no treaty. Naturally will not be recognized by relevant countries in the international community.
Fighting does not solve any problem. It can only make China more isolated worldwide.
China's current situation is already passive.
Other netizens believe that China truly has no face,
to the point that I no longer dare to look at foreigners, preferring to deceive people internally. The Chinese government needs to give its people some confidence. Regarding the policy of sheltering disputes and jointly developing, a netizen from Jiangxi Province, China, believes, what is ours, proposing joint development with others is self-contradictory. China is entirely passive. Perhaps because of this, currently, China disregards Vietnam's sovereignty, disregards international law, bringing drilling rigs to drill in Vietnam's exclusive economic zone to explore and exploit oil and gas. Another person said, the Chinese government advocates the Nine-Dash Line, acknowledges disputes in the South China Sea, but demands all rights within the Nine-Dash Line. After the People's Republic of China was established, on all officially published maps, the Nine-Dash Line is marked. The Chinese government has never officially explained its legal status and implications. This is mainly to avoid stirring up the South China Sea issue, but all statements by the Chinese government on the South China Sea issue consider the islands and adjacent waters within the Nine-Dash Line as part of China's sovereign territory illegally. Regarding the nature of the traditional Nine-Dash Line, even within China there are differing views, basically including theories such as national borderline, historic waters, and island scope line.
A netizen from Zhejiang Province, China, raised a skeptical question. SGDP surpasses the US, ranking first in the world. It is said that China.
Then what is the rank of China's national dignity and character in the world? The Nine-Dash Line is brought by China, and surrounding countries do not recognize it. The South China Sea is not the East China Sea. China also has no naval or air bases in the Spratly Islands, which belong to Vietnam's sovereignty. Deciding to fight the US in the South China Sea, the Chinese military is not sure of it. Not only that, some also believe that China's maritime claims are so domineering. How much support can it get? Being more realistic would be better, wouldn't it?
This is not a world that relies on force to show off.
Looking around, China does not have the strength to fight the whole world.
Moreover, the late April issue of the South China Morning Post
published a commentary by Associate Professor Mike Rossett of Hong Kong Chinese University. China's stance has no standing in international public opinion.
Even countries that China considers friends firmly oppose the above sovereignty claims. Nine-Dash Line.
To claim sovereignty over most of the South China Sea lacks a solid historical and legal basis.
Geographically, the Paracel and Spratly Islands are also much closer to Vietnam than to mainland China.
This expert affirms that, although they do not have authority in foreign affairs like the central government, the people of Hong Kong still strongly desire a peaceful solution to the current impasse.